Yadam, yadadum. Hum-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Yadum, yadadum. Yap-ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Dust in the wind. Oh, there is dust in the wind. Dust in the wind. Oh, there is dust in the wind. Yadum, yadadum. Yum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Yum, yadadum. Yup. Ba-ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Dust in the wind. Oh, there is dust in the wind. Dust in the wind. Oh, there is dust in the wind. Yadum, yadum, yum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Yum, yadum, yum, yadum, yum, yadum, da-da-dum. Hum, da-da-dum, yum, da-da-dum, yadum. I close my eyes only for a moment. And the moment's gone. Ha! All my dreams, pass before my eyes a curiosity. Dust in the wind. Oh, here is dust. Dust in the wind. Here is dust in the wind. Dearest Father, dearest Father, recently you asked me why I maintain that I am afraid of you. As usual, I didn't know how to answer. In part because of my fear of you, and in part because my fear rests on so many details I couldn't have even discussed half of it. Franz. And if now I attempt to give you an answer in writing, it will be still far from complete, because I'm still hindered by my fear and all that flows from it. Because there's far too much for my mind to remember and consider. You have always put the matter extremely simply, at least to me, and without care to many others. It appears thus to you, perhaps. You have worked hard all your life. Yes! Yes! And for the sake of your children, and above all for me, you have sacrificed everything. Yeah. Yes, I have. Yes. While I have lived a high life, with complete freedom to study what I wanted, and with no cares about food, and so for you, no cares at all. And for this, you've never demanded gratitude, you know, the gratitude of the children, but you expect some recognition, some sign of sympathy. Instead of which, I've always crawled away from you, to my room, to my books, to mad friends, to extreme ideas, and I've never spoken to you freely. And in temple, I haven't approached you. And in Franzenbad, I never looked for you. And I have no family sense. And I never troubled myself with the business or other concerns. And I saddled you with the factory and then deserted you. And I sided with my sister Odla in her stubbornness. And while I wouldn't move a finger for you, not even to get you theater tickets, yes, for strangers, I've done everything. And if you were to sum up your judgment of me, it would come to this. You've not accused me of being evil or indecent, except possibly with regard to the last woman I wanted to marry, but cold, remote, ungrateful. And more than this, it is all my fault, because with just some touch of the wheel, I could have made everything different. And by the same token, you are innocent, except that you've been too good to me. And up to a point, I agree. I also believe that you are innocent of the growing distance between us. But I am innocent as well. And if I could bring you to accept this, we might make some sort of peace. Not a new life, we're both too old for that, but an end to the tension, and there might be some mildness in your constant reproaches. Oddly enough, you have some idea of what I want to express. You said recently, I've always liked you. And if I don't show it in the way that other fathers do, well, it's because I can't put on a performance. Father, I've never doubted your good intentions towards me, but I believe these words are false. It's true, you can't put on an act. But that doesn't mean the other fathers are play acting. And this idea is either an undiscussable assertion or, and this is my opinion, a veiled sign that something is not in order between us and that you are partly responsible, but without guilt. And if this is also your opinion, then we're in one. Naturally, I'm not saying I am as I am just due to your influence. That would be to exaggerate, and I am prone to this exaggeration. It's far from likely I could have become a man after your own heart, even if I had grown up without you. I'd still probably be a weak, fearful, hesitant, troubled man, and neither Robert Kafka nor Carl Herman, but still completely different to what I am, and we could have tolerated each other. I would have been fortunate to have had you as a friend, a boss, an uncle, a grandfather, and even, though here I hesitate, a father-in-law. Only as a father were you too strong for me, particularly as my brothers died young and my first sister was born long after me, and I had to endure the first onslaught completely alone, and for that I was far too weak. Compare us. I, to be curt, a Lowy, with something of a Kafka about him, but without a Kafka's will to live, succeed, and triumph. No, instead I'm goaded by a Lowy's spirit, which drives me in a different direction when it doesn't leave me abandoned. And it works in a way that is more shy, more secretive. And you are a true Kafka. With strength, health, appetite, a loud voice, glib tongue, self-satisfied and worldly wise, enduring and quick-witted, a judge of character and a conscientious benefactor. But, naturally, with all these advantages come faults and weaknesses which are brought out by your temperament and sometimes by your violent rage. But on the other hand, perhaps time has changed you. Perhaps you were happier before you were disappointed and depressed at home by your children, particularly me, for when strangers arrived, you were different. Perhaps you're happier now due to the warmth you derive from your son-in-law and your grandchildren, which is something your own children, except perhaps Valley, couldn't give you. In any case, we were so different to each other. And in that difference, so dangerous, that if one had wanted to calculate in advance what impact we would have on each other, you, the finished man, and I, the slowly developing child, one would have expected you would have stamped down on me till nothing remained. But that didn't happen. Something alive can't be reduced to a formula. Yet perhaps what happened was worse. Though I do ask you to remember always, I never held you to be guilty for what transpired. You shaped me as you had to shape me, and I gave way under the pressure. But you should stop thinking of this as something particularly evil on my part. I was a fearful child. But despite this, I was also stubborn. And I was certainly spoiled by mother, but I don't believe I was particularly obstinate. And I don't think I needed anything more than a friendly word. A quiet taking by the hand. A happy look. There's just a single incident I can recall from those early years. Perhaps you remember it as well. Once, I whimpered long into the night for water. 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 Not from thirst. Probably in part to anger you, in part to entertain myself. Water. After threats had failed to help, you came to my room, you took me out of my bed, and you carried me to the courtyard balcony and left me there alone in my shirt for a little while outside the closed door. I won't say you were wrong. Perhaps that was the only way to get some peace in the night. But I will say that it characterized your education methods and their effect on me. I was, from then on, probably obedient, but I had an inner scar. Due to my nature, it was impossible for me to link these things in the right way. The senseless asking for water, which to me seemed normal, and being carried outside, which filled me with terror. And for years I was tormented by the thought that this giant man, my father, could almost without reason come to me in the night, lift me out of bed, and leave me on the balcony. He was my final court of appeal, and to him I was such a nothing. This was only a slight beginning. But my overmastering sense of nothingness stems largely from your influence. I just needed a little encouragement, a little friendliness, a little openness with regard to my own way, but instead you blocked this with the good intention that I should head in a way that was altogether different, but it didn't do any good. You encouraged me when, for example, I saluted well and marched, but I was no future soldier. You encouraged me when I ate vigorously, or when I drank beer, or when I sang songs which I didn't understand, or when I parroted your favorite expressions, but neither did those things belong to my future. At that time, for everything, at that time, I just needed to be given courage. For I was borne down just by your physique. I remember how we often undressed together in the changing room. I, meager, weak, small, you, strong, great, broad. And already in the changing room, I was miserable. Though, to be precise, not just in front of you, but in front of the entire world. But for me, you, were the measure of all things. And then we stepped out of the cabin in front of all the people, I in your hand, a little skeleton, uncertain and bare feet on the planks, in fear of the water, and incapable of swimming like you. And though your intentions were good, you instilled in me a deep shame because you showed me over and over again how to swim, and still I couldn't. And I was in despair. And all my bad experiences of everything we united marvelously in that moment. And this all matches your lordly spirit. You rose so high in the world through your own strength that you gained boundless faith in your own judgment. This was not such a wonder to me as a child as when I was a young man. In your armchair, you ruled the world. Your opinion was right. All other opinions were mad, extreme, freakish, not normal. So great was your self-trust that you could contradict yourself and still be right. And it could also happen that you had no opinion on a subject, in which case all other opinions had to be worthless. And you could condemn the Czechs and the Germans and the Jews, all of them in each and every respect, until the only man left standing, the only man left undamned was yourself. Just you alone remained. And you became that puzzle for me, which belongs to all tyrants. The law lay in your person and not in your wisdom. Or at least that's how it seemed to me. All of my seemingly independent thoughts were from the start loaded with your disapproving judgment. And I'm not talking here about higher thoughts, but every little undertaking of childhood. One needed only to be joyful about something and meet you on coming home, to be greeted with an ironical sigh, or a shaking of the head, or a drumming of the fingers on the table. Naturally, one couldn't expect enthusiasm for every childish thing when you live such a troubled life, but that doesn't explain it. The explanation has more to do with your contrary nature, which always fundamentally led you to disappoint the child. The courage, determination, confidence, and joy for anything would just bleed away in the face of your opposition, or what it seemed you would oppose me, and your opposition could almost always be assumed. I could never understand why you were so insensitive to the sorrow and the shame you inflicted on me with your words and your judgment. It was as if you didn't sense your own power. And I certainly made you ill with words, but I knew what I was doing, though it hurt me, but I couldn't control myself. I couldn't hold back my words, though I regretted them. But you landed blows with your words, and you were clueless. You never pitied anyone. Not then, not later. And people were defenseless before you. When I was a child, I mostly saw you during meals, so your instructions were mostly about how to behave at the table. What was brought to the table was to be eaten and not discussed. And yet, whatever our cook served up, you called it, animal feed from the beast. Because you were always hungry and liked to eat food quickly and in big mouthfuls while it was hot, well, we all had to do the same. And in silence. First eat, then talk, was your command. Or, quicker, quicker, quicker. Or, look you, I finished ages ago. Bones could not be held in the hand and picked clean. Except by you. Vinegar could not be slurped, except by you. It was vital how the bread was cut. Well, you could cut it with a knife just dripping with sauce. One had to be careful not to let crumbs fall to the floor. But when we finished, mostly under you. One could not be distracted at the table. You cut your nails, you sharpen pencils, you clean your ears with toothpicks. But please, Father, understand me correctly. These were all completely insignificant details, and yet they oppressed me because you, a great man of authority, could lay down rules for me and then ignore them. And through this, I saw that the world was divided into three parts. In the first, lived the slave, me, under laws invented solely for my life, but to which, without understanding why, I could never fully adjust. In the second part lived you, infinitely far from me, busy ruling, giving commands, and being angry when they weren't followed. And in the third lived everybody else, happy and free of commands and obedience. The impossibility of a quiet conversation had a further and natural result. I forgot speech. I probably never would have been a great talker, but I could have learned the common easy chatter of men. But when I was young, you denied me any word, no word of contradiction, and you threatened me with your raised hand, and I was stifled in your presence. And though you are an excellent talker as far as your own things are concerned, I got a faltering, stuttering style of speech, and even that was too much for you. So I became silent. First, perhaps out of defiance, and then because I could neither think near you nor speak. Your extremely effective, and at least with regards to me, never failing educational technique consisted of abuse, threats, irony, a mocking laugh, and a peculiar self-pity. That you abused me directly with abusive words, I cannot remember. It wasn't necessary. You had other means. In any case, your words flew about the house and more often the shop. Abuse was scattered everywhere, so your words rang in my mind, and sometimes you were almost deafening. You backed your derision with threats. I'll rip you apart like a fish. Oh, God, that was dreadful to me. Even though I knew nothing bad would happen. Yet as a young child, I didn't know this. But your words served as a sign of your power, and you always seemed capable of doing something. And it was also dreadful when you shouted left and right at the table and tried to grab someone or pretended to try until Mother seemingly came to the rescue. When I began something which didn't please you and you threatened me with failure, well, my awe for your opinion was so great. Failure was unavoidable. At first, perhaps, and if not, later. I lost the confidence to do anything. I was unsettled, doubtful. There were times when you could suffer silently and, strengthened by love and kindness, overcome the barriers and be sympathetic. This was seldom, but it was wonderful. When, for example, I would see you after lunch on a hot summer's day, taking a nap with your elbow on your desk. Or when you would come to us harassed on a Sunday during the summer holidays. Or when Mother was dangerously ill and you were weeping and you were shaking and you clasped hold of the bookcase. Or when I was ill the last time and laying in bed in Otla's room and you stopped at the door and you stretched out your neck and you waved your hand out of consideration for me. At such times, one could lie down and cry for one's good fortune. You also have a special smile of a type which is seldom seen. It's quiet, and it's content, and it's approving, and it's beautiful when it appears, and it makes me feel glad. I cannot remember it being directed at me as a child, but it may have been, sir, for why should you have refused to smile at me when I was still innocent in your eyes and your great hope? But even such friendly impressions just ended by confirming my sense of guilt and leaving me even more clueless as to the order of the world. But it's true, you barely hit me. But the shouting, and your reddening face, and your braces being torn off, and the positioning of the chair back, they were almost worse. They were like preparations for a hanging. But a hangman is dead. And all is finished, but if he has seen the preparations and the noose is before his face, and then he hears of his reprieve, well, he is left to lament his existence for the rest of his years. And I thought about this many times, when in your opinion it was clear that I deserved a beating, but by your mercy I escaped. And I was burdened with guilt. On all sides, before you, I felt guilty. You have reproached me without pause. You have said that I must thank your work for my lack of need, for my life of peace, warmth, and abundance. So your remarks. They must have scratched furrows in my brain. When I was 7, I had to drag a cart from village to village, huh? We all had to sleep in one room. We were lucky when we had potatoes. I had open wounds on my legs because we didn't have enough clothes in the winter. As a little boy, I had to go to Pisek to work in a shop. I got nothing from my family. But when I did my military service, I still sent money home. Ha! Nevertheless, the father for me was always the father. Now who knows that today? What do children know? They've never suffered. What today does a child know? Ha! Such tales under other circumstances could have been an excellent part of an education and could have helped your children by making them cheerful and powerful and urging them through the same troubles and hardships that you had faced. But you didn't want that. The result of your suffering was something else. Because of what you had achieved, there was no opportunity to follow in your path. To have had such an opportunity, it would have been necessary to rebel with force and break away from home. But you didn't want this. This you marked as ingratitude, exaggeration, disobedience, treachery, madness. While on the one side, you urged us forward with examples and stories and shame. On the other, you hindered us with all your strength. I'm not saying our condition was worse than yours. The suffering was probably comparable, though our natures are different. But I will say that we have the disadvantage that we can't boast of our hardships or humiliate anyone with them, unlike you. I also don't deny that I might have been able to accept and use the fruits of your great and successful work. To your joy, I might have taken your work further and carried on in business. But we are too remote. And I could only accept what you gave me in shame, fatigue, weakness, and guilt. And how could I thank you, except as a beggar? So I tried to flee everything connected with you. This was the obvious result of your complete education. First, the shop. So long as it was a hole-in-the-wall affair and I was a child, I should have enjoyed it tremendously. It was lively. It was lit up at night. I saw and heard so much. I could help here and there and be useful. I marveled at your talents as a shopkeeper, how you sold things, how you managed people, how funny you were. You resolved doubts at once. And you knew which crates to unpack and which to put away, and it was all such excellent theater and not the worst of schools. But gradually, in all ways, you became frightful to me. And you and the shop merged, and the place no longer held any joy. Things which I had at first taken for granted came to torment and shame me, especially the way you treated people. When, for example, some goods threatened to get mixed up with others on the table, you would hurl everything to the floor. The shop assistants would have to retrieve everything. But here, the blindness of your rage excuses you a little. And there was your usual comment about one of the staff who had tuberculosis. That sick dog should crawl away and die. And you called your employees paid enemies. Which is true in a way, as you were their paying enemy. And there I received the great lesson that you could be unjust, which in my own case I hadn't then realized because I had accumulated too much guilt to doubt your judgment. But with my childish eyes, I saw the people there as strangers who needed to work for us, but who lived in constant fear of you, and essentially this feeling endured. The place upset me. Reminded me of my relationship with you. Regardless of your interest as the owner, your desire to dominate in business, you were simply superior to all the people that came to the shop to learn their trade. And I thought, if you couldn't tolerate what they did, then slowly but irrevocably, what I did would also become intolerable to you. Therefore, I belonged essentially to the Workers' Party. And due to this fear, which I couldn't define, but which stemmed from this inexplicable abuse of strangers, I wanted a reconciliation. because I dreaded that your employees would rise up against you and the family and me. So I became more than normally respectful towards the staff. I was more than modest. I was humble. Even at first greeting, I would try to speak first and avoid a reply. But whatever I could do in my insignificance, even if I licked the soles of their shoes, it couldn't compensate for what you, the master, did to them from above. This relationship with others, it went further than the shop. It extended into the future, and finally, I was afraid to go into the shop. It just ceased to be my affair. But then I entered gymnasium and was further distracted by my schooling. Equally slight was the chance for salvation from you in Judaism. Here salvation was conceivable. It was even conceivable that we could be together as Jews. It could have been a starting point for a shared life. But what sort of religion did I get from you? Well, over the years I've had 3 different opinions of the matter. As a child, you reproached me for not going often enough to temple, for not fasting, and so on. Well, I felt I'd injured you through this, and I felt guilty, as I always did, for I was guilty through and through. Later, as a young man, I couldn't understand why you reproached me for not having enough Jewish sentiment, given that your religion meant nothing to you. For unlike you, I couldn't force this nothing into faith, though you told me I should, out of piety. It was truly a nothing, as far as I could see, a joke. Not even a joke. You went to temple 4 times a year, and you were indifferent. You weren't like those who prayed earnestly. Your prayers were a formality, and I was astounded you could even help me find my place in the prayer book. And the only thing that mattered to you was I was there, for you let me roam about as I pleased. I yawned and I dozed throughout the long hours. Only dancing lessons ever matched the temple for boredom. And I look forward to the small distractions, such as when the Ark of the Covenant opened, which remind me of that box at the shooting gallery whose doors open when you, bing, hit the bullseye. But there, interesting things could be found. Here, there was just old puppets without their heads. Moreover, I suffered a great deal of fear, not just because of the crowds of people, but because you once said, just in passing, that I might be called to recite from the Torah. So I trembled for years. Apart from that, I wasn't fundamentally disturbed by my boredom, except perhaps by my bar mitzvah, and the laughable memorizing of words, and the laughable examination. Oh, and the little details which concerned you, such as when you would recite from the Torah. Getting through the ceremony, which in my eyes remained exclusively social, was for you the main thing. And then, there were the prayers for the souls of the dead. And I would be sent away, but you would remain in temple. And for a long time, because I lacked any deep interest in what actually happened, and because I was sent away, I had the barely conscious feeling that somebody was dealing with something indecent. So much for the temple. And at home, what was worse, Passover was more and more reduced to a comedy due to the shrieks of your elder children. So this was the material of faith which was handed down to me, with the slight addition at the high festivals of your whisper and pointing hand in the temple. Psst! The sons of the millionaire Fuchs. What better to have been done with all this material than to just thrown it all away? It seemed to me the most pious thing to do. Only later did I grasp why here again you thought that I had maliciously betrayed you. From the village ghetto you had carried something Jewish with you, and though it was not much, and made even less by the army and the city, it could still hold the impressions and memory of your youth of one type of Jewish life, and it was enough for you, because you didn't need much help in this respect, and you came from a culture with such deep roots that you only noticed those ideas that touched your position in society. Indeed, your faith and life are mainly based on the belief that the opinions held by a certain Jewish class are absolutely true. And as these opinions are part of your nature, faith for you means believing in yourself. And it was still enough Jewishness for you, but as a hand-me-down, it didn't serve the child. It all vanished when you tried to pass it on. Partly because your youthful impressions couldn't be passed on, and partly because your dreadful nature didn't allow it. And it was impossible to grasp for a very fearful and very observant child how the few nothings you held on to in the name of Judaism could produce more than nothing in the face of your own indifference. But for you, they were mementos of an earlier age, and you wanted to instill them from me. But even for you, they had no value in themselves. So you resorted to force and threats, but it didn't do any good. And you couldn't see the weakness of your own Judaism, and in your eyes, I was stubborn, so you raged. It seems to you that I've become more concerned with Jewish things in recent years, and your reaction has provided a belated confirmation of my view of your faith. From the start, you were against anything that interested me, especially the manner of my Judaism. And here it was the same. One might have thought you would have made a small exception in this case, for it was the Jewish religion, the faith, which had stirred you. And through this, there was also the possibility of a new relationship between us. I don't deny that if you had become interested, I would have grown suspicious. I can't claim in this respect to be somehow better than you, but the matter was never put to the test. Through me, Judaism became revolting to you, and Jewish writing unreadable. It was disgusting, which might imply that the special Judaism you gave to me as a child was for you the only valid type. It's hard to believe this is truly your opinion. Therefore, your disgust can only mean that you unconsciously recognize the weakness of your Judaism and the poverty of education that you gave me, and that you don't like to be reminded of it, so all things which bring this to mind provoke your hatred. Struck a better blow when you aimed at my writing, and hit unknowingly all that went with it. Here was an independent part of me which had escaped you. Now think of a worm trodden underfoot whose head tears itself free and slithers away. That was somewhat secure. I could breathe. And exceptionally here, I welcomed your dislike. And my vanity and ambition did suffer from the way you greeted my books, with the words which are now famous between us. Stick it on the bedside table. Normally you were playing cards when the book arrived. Yet fundamentally, I was satisfied. Not only due to malice, not only due to the confirmation of my view of our relationship, but because within me your words sounded like, now you are free. Naturally, that was a delusion. I was not free, or to be extremely hopeful, not yet free. But my writing dealt with you. I lamented there what I could not lament on your breast. It was an intentionally long farewell to you, which you forced out of me, but which I shaped. But how little it all was. And it wouldn't be worth mentioning, except that it was part of my life. Indeed, it ruled my life. In my childhood, it was my expectation. Later, it was my hope and my despair. It even dictated the few small decisions I made, though these were still shaped by your influence. For example, my choice of career. You generously and patiently gave me complete freedom. Let us follow the habits, or at least the values, of the Jewish middle class concerning their sons. But here, your misunderstanding of my character worked its effect, which together with your father's pride blinded you to my real nature, to my weakness. In your opinion, I was always studying as a child. Later, I was always writing. Looking back, this is certainly not true. I can say with very little exaggeration that I barely studied, and I learned nothing. To have retained something after so many years of education wasn't remarkable for a man with a memory and some intelligence, but given the vast expenditure of time and money, and my outwardly easy, unburdened life, what I achieved with regard to knowledge, especially sound knowledge, was nothing. Certainly as compared with what others managed. I was worried about myself in all manner of ways. For example, I was worried about my health. I was worried about my hair falling out, my digestion, my back, for it was stooped, and all my worries turned to fear, and it all ended in true sickness. What was all that? Not actual bodily sickness. I was sick because I was a disinherited son who needed constant reassurance about his own peculiar existence, who in the most profound sense never owned anything, who was even insecure about the thing that was next to him, his own body. I grew tall. I didn't know what to do with myself. The weight was so heavy, my back was bent. I could hardly exercise or move. I remained weak. I was astounded at the wonder of anything remaining under my control, such as my digestion. That served to ruin it. Then the road was open to hypochondria, and through the superhuman desire to be married, blood flowed out of my lungs, though the responsibility for this must be shared by my desire to write, which led me to take the apartment in Schönborn Palace. So the cost was not excessive work as you always imagined. Even in years when I was healthy, I spent more time lying on the sofa than you have in your entire life, sickness included. I hurried away with so much to do. It was mostly just to lie down in my room. You would have been horrified if you'd seen the tiny amount I achieved at home and in the office. But I was probably not lazy by nature. There was just nothing for me to do. And so this was my condition when I received the freedom to choose my career. Was I capable of using that freedom? Did I have the courage for a true career? My self-regard depended on your opinion. Seldom was it otherwise. An outward success could give me courage for a moment, but nothing more. Afterwards, my dependency would be all the worse. I never thought I'd get through the first year of junior school, but I did. I even got a prize. But the entrance exam to gymnasium looked to be impossible, and yet I passed. But then I had to face the first year of senior school. Whoa, and so it went on and on. I gained no confidence. On the contrary, the longer it lasted, the more convinced I was of my ultimate failure. And in your hostile attitude, I had my proof. In my mind's eye, I often saw my teachers gathered together discussing me. Discussing how I'd managed to get through the first year, and the second year, and the third year, and so on. Discussing how I had crept from one success to another, and how the heavens cried out for justice, and what jubilation there would be when it was finally administered. And it wasn't just at school. In my mind's eye, I saw this everywhere, which just wasn't easy for a child to live with. So how could I trouble myself over my lessons? At that decisive age, I could neither attend my lessons nor anything else. I was like a bank clerk who had committed fraud, but still had to keep working, but without any interest in the bank except to avoid discovery. So small, so far was everything from what truly mattered. And yet at last I reached the final exam, which I partly swindled my way through, and then I was free. Free to concentrate on myself, which I'd even managed to do under the constraints of the gymnasium. Thus, there was no real choice of career. I knew everything would still be irrelevant to me. I just had to find something which was compatible with my self-absorption and also my vanity. Though, due to a combination of pride and hope, I did spend a fortnight on chemistry and half a year on German, but then I studied law, which meant For the few months before the final university exam, my mind was fed with intellectual sawdust which had been chewed by 1,000 mouths before, and my nerves suffered. Though it suited me in a way, just as school had suited me and my office job suited me, they all fitted my condition. And it was all foreseen. My foresight as a child was astounding. At school and at work, there was no hope for salvation. Here, salvation had been renounced long before. But I didn't show any foresight about the possibility of marriage and what it would mean to me. So far, this has been the greatest horror of my life. And it was almost completely unexpected. As a child, I developed slowly. And though I had thoughts of the need for marriage now and then, the thing was really beyond me. I certainly didn't recognize that there would be a prolonged ordeal over marriage and that it would be the decisive and bitterest examination of my life. In reality, my desire to be married was my greatest and most hopeful attempt to escape from you. And therefore my failure here was also the greatest. I suspect there has been nothing in your life which has matched the significance for me of marriage. Your life has been more full, more troubled, and richer than mine. Therefore, I believe nothing has been as important as this. It's as if one man had 5 low steps to walk up, and a second man had just a single step. But that single step was as tall as the 5 put together. And the first man can not only cope with the initial 5 steps, but with hundreds, even thousands more. And his life will be great and strenuous, but there will be nothing in it comparable to the single step of the second man, whose only step is beyond his strength. And he cannot climb up nor naturally get round it to reach the step above. To marry. To start a family. And accept all the children that come and help them in this insecure world is the best that a man can do. Many people succeed in doing this, but that doesn't alter the argument, because many people just seem to succeed. And to those few who do succeed, it mostly just happens. They don't do it. So this isn't the ultimate achievement, but still something good and honorable, especially as happening and doing aren't easy to distinguish. A man doesn't need to fly to the sun. He need only find a patch of clean earth, lay there, and let the sun shine on him. And how was I prepared for this? As badly as possible, as I'm sure is already clear. You didn't involve yourself in any personal instruction or general preparation on the ground, but you were constrained by the habits of class, nation, and age. Well, nothing else could have been expected. You did something, but not very much. To have done more would have required a close and mutual understanding, and we had failed to establish that long before the decisive time. Well, we had no luck. Our needs are so different. Things which fascinate you don't touch me. Where you see innocence, I see guilt. What has no consequence for you is another nail in my coffin. I remember going for a walk with you and Mother one evening, and on Josephplatz, close to what is now the Lander Bank. I started to reproach you for not discussing some interesting things with me, and I spoke to you as I normally did then, stupid boasting and condescension, and I was proud, and I was cool, and I stammered. I said that it was only due to the advice of some fellow schoolboys that I'd been saved from great danger. which was a gross lie. I wanted to appear brave through being close to danger, but due to my fears, I'd managed nothing more than the normal self-abuse of city children. And I concluded by saying everything was now in order and I was beyond the point where I needed any help. I'd started to speak because I wanted to raise the subject. I was curious. And I wanted to avenge myself on both of you somehow over something. But true to your nature, you simply said, "Oh, I could have given you advice on safely tackling these matters." And I was offended. Or at least I thought I should be. Though I'd probably aim for such an answer. Yeah, that would have fitted the lecherous, self-preoccupied, physically inert, meat-stuffed schoolboy that was me. And I had to stop talking. I couldn't carry on. Though I wanted to. And with arrogance, I abruptly ended the conversation. What you said then isn't easy to judge. It was both primeval and modern. Frank and heedless. I don't know how old I was at the time. I don't know if I was more than 16, but for a young man, it was a notable answer. The first true piece of advice about living you'd given me, which shows the distance between us. Your words sank in then, but their significance half emerged in my consciousness much later. What you said meant that I should do something we both considered to be extremely dirty. And you wanted to be sure that my body didn't carry any of the filth home because it was your home and you wanted to protect it. I should be pushed into the slime, but you should remain clean. You should keep your self-respect as a married man, for you should remain outside of your own advice. The impact of this was probably even worse then, because at that time, marriage for me was associated with shame. It was impossible for me to apply what I'd heard about marriage in general to you and Mother, thus you remained even purer and far above these matters. It was unthinkable. You'd given yourself your own advice before you were married. I saw you in absolute purity. And you were willing to throw me into the dirt with a couple of words. And in the world, there was just you and me. And with you, the purity ended, and with me, the filth began. And it was incredible. You could have given me such advice. It could only be explained by my deep-rooted guilt and your deep-rooted contempt. And this thought grabbed hold of my heart. I can see the innocence on both sides all the more clearly because something similar happened 20 years later. The circumstances were different, but it was just as gruesome, but it didn't hurt so much because at 36, there wasn't much left of me to harm. I mean, that little talk we had. One of those agitated days when I told you of my wedding plans. You said something like, "Oh, she probably put on a skimpy blouse, huh? Something those Jewish girls in Prague know how to do. Oh, naturally, you decided to marry her, huh? And straight away, in a week, tomorrow, today, I don't understand you. Haven't you got any idea other than marrying whoever takes your fancy? You're a grown man. You live in a city. If you're scared, I'll come with you." Probably your words were cruder than this. I can't remember the details. I think a cloud formed before my eyes, and I was more interested in Mother, who agreed with you completely, yet took something from the table and left the room. You've hardly ever made your contempt clearer or humiliated me more deeply with words. When you spoke to me in a similar way 20 years earlier, it at least showed you thought I was ready to be initiated into life without detour. There was some respect in your direct approach. But now, your words show that your contempt has grown. And I am stuck. I'm not 20 years more experienced, just 20 years more wretched. And when I decided to marry a woman, it meant nothing.
shame to you?
Whenever I have tried to decide anything, you have restrained me. And now you think you know what my decisions are worth? You know nothing about my attempts to escape from you from other ways, and so you know nothing about my reasons here. Therefore, as fits your general view of me, you gave me the most revolting, most crude, most ridiculous advice. And you didn't hesitate to give it to me in the crudest manner. For in your eyes, the shame which you inflicted on me with your words was nothing compared to the shame which would be attached to you by this marriage. Now, indeed, there is much you can say about my marriage plans, and you have. You can't have much respect for my decisions because I twice got engaged, twice broke it off, and I pointlessly dragged you and Mother to Berlin for celebrations, which is true, but why did it happen? My desire to be married rested on a sound idea. To establish a home and become independent. As an idea, you found this appealing. But in reality, there is an obstacle. Just as in a child's game where one grasps the wrist of the other and says, "Go away." Why won't you go away? But in our case, it's much more complicated because when you say go away, you mean it. And yet, your personality always holds me. Or more accurately, holds me down. I met both women by chance, but they were both extremely well chosen. Your idea that I should marry for the sake of a blouse shows how little you understand me. I am fearful, suspicious, hesitant. I thought about marriage day and night, in one case for years, in another for months, with all the strength of my mind. Neither of these women disappointed me. I disappointed them. My opinion of both of them was the same as when I was intent on getting married. So why didn't I get married? There were obstacles in the way. But dealing with obstacles is life. No, the true obstacle was me. Spiritually, I'm not fit for marriage. From the moment I decide to marry, I can't sleep. My head burns. I have no more life. I just stagger through each day. There are particular concerns. I have countless concerns, and I worry over them as I am melancholic and pedantic, but none of my concerns are fundamental. They're just worms feeding on the corpse of my engagement, which was killed by the pressure of fear, weakness, and self-contempt. But I want to get closer to an explanation. My desire to be married forcibly unites two seemingly contradictory things which shape my relationship with you. Marriage guarantees the highest liberation and independence. I would have a family, which is the best that a man can achieve. It's the best that you have achieved, and I would be your equal. My shame and your tyranny would be at an end. It is the prospect of being close to you that makes marriage partly attractive. I can imagine the equality we would both enjoy. It would mean more to you than any other equality and be more beautiful. I could be a son who is freer, more thankful, less guilty, more upright. You could be a father who is less troubled, less tyrannical, more sympathetic, more content. But to reach this point, all that has happened between us would have to be undone. So we would have to be abolished. But we are as we are. And marriage is your domain, and so it is forbidden to me. At times, I imagine a map of the world laid out, with you stretched across it. And all that's left from my life are the areas that you don't cover or can't reach. And because I see you as a giant, my territory is miserable and small and doesn't include marriage. I'm not saying the example of your marriage stopped me from marrying. You didn't drive me from marriage as you drove me from the shop. Now, the problem was the opposite. Despite some faint resemblance, your marriage looked ideal. Ideal in constancy, the number of children, the help you gave each other. It was only when your children grew up that they disturbed the peace, but they didn't disturb the marriage. And perhaps the high ideal I had came from the example of your marriage, but the longing had no strength, and that is due to your relationship with your children, and that is the subject of this entire letter. Some people argue that the fear of marriage can derive from the fear of being treated by one's children as one treated one's parents. But in my case, I believe it doesn't apply. I am guilty because of you. My guilt stems uniquely from you. This uniqueness is part of the misery. It's unthinkable that it could be repeated. Yet I have to say, I couldn't bear such a mute, glum, dry, wretched son, and would run away if there were no other option, emigrate, as you had wanted to, on hearing of my engagement, which perhaps made my inability to marry even greater. But much more important is the fear about myself, in the sense that in my writing, and everything that goes with it, there is some hope of independence and escape. Even though it hasn't taken me very far, and I don't know if I will go any further, nevertheless, it is my duty, indeed, it is my very life to watch over this source of hope and protect it against danger as far as I can, even to protect it against the possibility of danger. Marriage is one such possible danger. It is also possibly a great help, but as it is a possible danger, I must guard against it. What could I do if it really was a danger? How could I carry on living with a feeling of danger which I couldn't prove, but I couldn't refute, and so I waver. But the outcome is certain. I must renounce marriage. The simile of a bird in the hand or two in the bush doesn't really fit here, as there's nothing in my hand and everything in the bush, and yet I choose the nothing. The circumstances of the struggle and the needs of my life give me no other option. The greatest obstacle to marriage can no longer be uprooted. It is my conviction that to support and guide a family, I would have to be like you. I would need to have the same qualities, all combined. Organically good and bad. You are strong, and you mock others. Healthy and gross, eloquent and aloof, self-confident, peevish, worldly wide and tyrannical, insightful and disdainful of most people. You also have other qualities without any disadvantages. For example, you are diligent, untiring, brave, and you have great presence of mind. Compare with this, I had nothing, or at least very little, to support me in marriage. So how could I take the risk? I could see that even you had struggled hard, and even so had failed with your children. But naturally, I didn't ask myself a clear question, nor did I give myself a clear answer. If I had, I would have considered other men who were different from you, like Uncle Richard, who had got married, and at least not collapsed, which was an achievement, and I would have been comforted. But I didn't make the question clear. I just suffered it from childhood on. And I didn't test myself at first against marriage, but against every trifle. And against every trifle I struggled because of your example and the way you brought me up, as I've tried to explain. So every trifle showed how little I was worth and proved you right. So what chance had I in the greatest test of all, in marriage? From when I was a child until I was engaged, I was like a businessman who trades without bookkeeping. And sometimes he makes a profit, but this is rare, and each success is exaggerated in his mind, but his losses are large and regular. And one day, some event, like the prospect of getting married, makes him draw up his books, and what does he find? And how then could he get married? That would be the short road to insanity. Such has been my life with you, and such are my prospects for the future. But even after looking over all my reasons for being afraid, you still might answer me. You say I make things simpler for myself by blaming everything on you, my son? Despite your apparent efforts, you don't make things harder for yourself. You actually make them more rewarding. Well, to start with, you want to shed all guilt and responsibilities. Oh, here we are the same. But I am open. And Frank, I tell you, it is all your fault. But you are too clever and subtle for that. You also say that I am innocent. Yeah, and that between the lines my guilt appears. Between the arguments about character and nature and content and helplessness, you make it clear that I attacked you and you only reacted in self-defense. And by your insincere methods, you prove three things. Firstly, you are innocent. Secondly, I am guilty. Thirdly, you are magnanimous. Because you're not only prepared to forgive me, but more or less you are prepared to ignore the truth and prove and believe that I am innocent. Oh, yeah, well, anyone think this is enough, but it's not enough for you. You decide to live off me. Yes, I agree, we fight. But there are two ways of fighting. The chivalrous fight, where each man uses his own strength, struggles for himself, fights for himself, loses for himself. And then there's the fight of vermin, sting and suck the blood of their victims. That's the real dedicated soldier, and that is you. And you prove that I have taken your capacity for life and put it in my pocket. Oh, why should it bother you? As I've left you unfit for life, you can relax and continue as you are without worry or self-reproach. Just lay back. I will drag you through life, body and soul. The responsibility is mine. For example, you wanted to get married, and then you didn't want to get married. That's what you said in this letter. And then you got engaged, and I got you out of it, without you having to make any effort. You had your means of escape because I was concerned about the disgrace this union would bring on your name. When you were engaged, I held myself back. I left you to make your choice. What good did it do me? My aversion to your marriage couldn't have restrained you, given what you call your desire to escape. It should have spurred you on, for an unwanted marriage would have made your escape complete. And my consent to your marriage didn't stop your reproaches. All this does is confirm for me that it was my reproaches that were justified. All of them. And I should have added that you were insincere, a sycophant, and a parasite. Sure. Even this letter, if I'm not mistaken, is further evidence of your parasitic attitude towards me. Huh. And how can I answer my father? By saying even these words, which could partly be used against you, come from me. Indeed, my self-doubt, fostered by your education, is so great that it is greater than the doubt you have for others. But the answer I provided for you tells us something new about our relationship and has some justification. In life, things don't fit together as neatly as do the proofs of my letter. Life is more than a game of solitaire. But even after allowing for this answer, which I can't and I don't want to elaborate on now, I still believe the letter contains some truth. It brings us closer to the truth. and therefore may allow us to live and die in a gentler and lighter spirit. I'm gonna sit right down and write myself a letter and make believe it came from you. I'm gonna write with words so sweet they're gonna knock me off my feet, with some kisses at the bottom, and I'll be glad I got 'em. I'm gonna smile and say I hope you're feeling better, and sigh with love the way you do. I'm gonna sit right down and write myself a letter and make believe it came from you.